Daniel Reyes never imagined his life would become a lesson in endurance. To the outside world, he was an ordinary man, quiet, dependable, and invisible in the way good men often are. He worked long hours at a small logistics company, came home with tired eyes and calloused hands, and still found the energy to sit at the kitchen table with his 3 daughters every night. Elena, the eldest, was thoughtful and observant, already carrying the weight of responsibility beyond her years. Sophia, the middle child, lived between laughter and sensitivity, quick to notice changes in tone or mood. Maribel, the youngest, was still small enough to believe her father could fix anything. For years, Daniel believed he had done everything right. His wife, Clara, had been his partner since their youth, charming, well-spoken, admired in the neighborhood. People often told Daniel how lucky he was to have such a wife, and he accepted the praise quietly, unaware that the foundation of his marriage was slowly cracking. The signs were there, subtle at first. Clara began staying out late, claiming work meetings or errands that didn't quite add up. Her phone never left her side, and her laughter, once freely shared with her family, became something private and guarded. Daniel noticed the change, but he chose denial over confrontation. He told himself that marriages went through phases, that trust meant patience. Most of all, he feared what the truth might do to his daughters. At night, when the house was silent, doubt crept in. Daniel lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, replaying moments he wished he had questioned. Yet every morning, he put on the same calm expression, packed lunches, fixed ponytails, and kissed foreheads. His pain became something he swallowed whole, believing a father's role was to absorb the storm so his children wouldn't feel the rain. Everything changed the afternoon Daniel came home early. The house was too quiet, and Clara's car was gone. On the kitchen counter lay her phone, vibrating with a message that shattered the fragile illusion Daniel had protected for years. The words were unmistakable, intimate, careless, undeniable. In that moment, betrayal stopped being a suspicion and became a fact. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone or collapse to the floor. Instead, he sat down, feeling something inside him go numb. His first thought was not of himself, but of his daughters, of how their world was about to change forever. When Clara returned, Daniel said little. He listened, not because he believed her excuses, but because he needed to understand how deeply the lie had gone. That night, after tucking the girls into bed, Daniel stood alone in the dark hallway. His marriage was broken, his trust destroyed, but his purpose was clear. No matter what came next, he would not walk away. Even as everything he believed in crumbled, Daniel made a silent vow. His daughters would never feel abandoned, even if he had been. The truth did not stay hidden for long. In a town where everyone knew each other's routines, secrets had a way of surfacing whether you wanted them to or not. Clara's affair, once concealed behind careful lies, unraveled in the most painful way possible, publicly. Daniel did not hear it from his wife. He heard it from whispers at the grocery store, from a coworker's awkward silence, and finally from a neighbor who spoke with false sympathy and real curiosity. The man Clara had been seeing was not a stranger. He was someone the family knew, someone who had sat at their table and laughed with their children. When the truth became undeniable, Clara did not fight to explain herself. Instead, she packed a suitcase in a rush of shame and defensiveness, claiming she needed space. That space turned into absence. One morning, Daniel woke up to an empty side of the bed and a note on the counter that said far too little to explain far too much. In a single moment, he became more than a betrayed husband. He became the sole parent of 3 broken-hearted girls. The impact on the sisters was immediate and devastating. Elena, old enough to understand betrayal, felt anger harden inside her like stone. She blamed her mother, the town, and even her father for not seeing the truth sooner. Sophia retreated inward, growing quiet and distant, her once bright spirit dimmed by confusion and mistrust. Maribel, too young to grasp the full reality, asked questions that cut Daniel deeper than any accusation. "When is Mom coming home?" she asked, night after night. Daniel stood at the center of the chaos, absorbing their grief while burying his own. He refused to speak ill of Clara, even when bitterness burned in his chest. He knew how easily hatred could poison young hearts, and he would not let his daughters grow up believing love always ended in cruelty. Instead, he spoke carefully, choosing honesty without cruelty, truth without revenge. Outside their home, judgment was relentless. Some people pitied Daniel, others blamed him. The girls felt the weight of gossip at school, in church, and in places that were once safe. Invitations stopped coming. Smiles became forced. The family name, once respected, now carried quiet scandal. Daniel watched his daughters shrink under the burden and vowed again to protect them, not with fists or fury, but with presence. Life became harder overnight. Bills piled up. Exhaustion followed Daniel everywhere. Still, he woke each morning before dawn, packed lunches, and reminded his daughters that they were loved. He attended parent meetings alone, sat through school performances with an empty seat beside him, and learned to live with silence where partnership once existed. The betrayal had shattered their family, but it had also revealed something unbreakable. Clara's absence left a hole that could never truly be filled, yet Daniel's devotion grew stronger in the wreckage. As the world turned their backs on them, he stood firm, becoming the one constant in a life suddenly defined by uncertainty. And though the pain was raw and unrelenting, the Reyes family took their first step forward, together, even if incomplete. Time did not soften the loss the way people promised it would. Instead, it reshaped it, turning absence into something permanent that followed the Reyes sisters through every stage of their lives. With their mother gone, childhood ended early inside that small house. Responsibilities multiplied, emotions deepened, and innocence faded faster than it should have. Daniel worked longer hours than ever before, taking extra shifts and side jobs just to keep the household afloat. Still, he never missed what mattered. He learned how to braid hair, sign permission slips, and listen without interrupting. He became the parent-teacher liaison, the nurse, the counselor, and the quiet cheerleader in the back of every room. Elena, now entering her teenage years, felt pressure settle onto her shoulders like a burden she never asked for. She became fiercely independent, stepping into a second parent role when Daniel wasn't home. She cooked meals, helped Maribel with homework, and shielded Sophia from cruel comments at school. But beneath her strength lived resentment. Elena struggled with anger, at her mother for leaving, at her father for forgiving too easily, and at herself for feeling weak when she wanted to cry. Sophia, caught in the middle, turned inward. She watched relationships carefully, studying people the way others studied books. Love, to her, became something unstable, something that could disappear without warning. She grew quiet and observant, expressing her pain through writing and art rather than words. Teachers praised her maturity, not realizing it was born from loss, not wisdom. Maribel, the youngest, felt the absence in a different way. She feared it. Every goodbye felt permanent, every late return a threat. She clung to Daniel with desperate loyalty, terrified that if her mother could leave, so could her father. Nightmares became common, and Daniel often found her asleep outside his bedroom door, seeking reassurance that he was still there. The outside world offered little comfort. Whispers followed the girls through hallways. Friends asked questions they didn't know how to answer. Holidays felt incomplete, and school events reminded them of what was missing. Daniel did his best to create new traditions, movie nights, Sunday breakfasts, small rituals meant to anchor them, but loneliness still found its way in. As the years passed, Daniel's quiet sacrifice became invisible even to their daughters. They relied on him so completely that they rarely noticed the cost. His social life vanished. Dreams he once had were quietly set aside. Loneliness settled into his bones, but he wore it with dignity, believing his pain was a small price to pay for their stability. growing up too fast changed the sisters forever. It shaped how they loved, how they trusted, and how they saw the world. Yet, in the midst of hardship, one truth remained unshaken. No matter how heavy life became, their father never left. And in that certainty, they found just enough strength to keep going, even when childhood slipped away long before they were ready. Elias Roth learned early that certainty was an illusion. He grew up in a household where prayer framed every meal and sacred texts sat on every shelf, yet none of it shielded his family from loss. When the local bank collapsed during his childhood, wiping out his parents' savings overnight, Elias noticed something that faith could not explain away. The church was full on Sunday, but empty on Monday when people needed help. That was the moment numbers began to replace prayer in his mind. Numbers, at least, never pretended to care. They simply told the truth. By his mid-30s, Elias had become one of the most respected private bankers in the world. Governments sought his advice, corporations feared his predictions, and billionaires trusted him with fortunes they would never admit existed. He had an almost supernatural ability to see patterns in chaos, to predict downturns months before they arrived. To Elias, markets were honest systems. They punished illusion and rewarded discipline. Faith, by contrast, seemed built on promises no one audited. Ironically, much of Elias's success came from managing wealth for religious institutions. Churches, mosques, temples, and interfaith foundations all used discreet financial channels to protect donations, fund expansion, and quietly settle scandals. Elias never questioned the morality of it. Money, he believed, was neutral. What intrigued him was how similar their financial behaviors were. Different gods, same balance sheets. Different doctrines, same hunger for stability. One evening, while reviewing consolidated reports from multiple global funds, Elias noticed something unsettling. Several rival religious organizations, some publicly hostile to one another, were drawing from interconnected financial reserves. Donations from one faith were indirectly stabilizing another. Losses in one region were quietly offset by gains elsewhere. It was not divine harmony that held them together, but financial necessity. Belief systems that preached eternal truth were behind closed doors, behaving like fragile corporations fighting insolvency. Elias began to dig deeper. He requested historical data, obscure transaction records, endowment adjustments labeled as spiritual expenditures. What he found disturbed him. Sudden doctrinal shifts aligned too neatly with economic crises. Moral rules relaxed during recessions. Strict traditions softened when attendance dropped. Even long-standing sins seemed to fluctuate based on donation trends. The realization hit him with unsettling clarity. Belief wasn't only taught, it was managed. For the first time in his life, Elias felt something close to awe, but it wasn't religious, it was structural. Religion, stripped of mystery, resembled a living financial organism, adapting, reshaping itself, surviving at all costs. Faith wasn't crumbling because people doubted God, it was bending because institutions feared bankruptcy. The rules people believed were eternal had been quietly renegotiated for centuries. Elias didn't feel anger, he felt curiosity. If faith could be adjusted to survive, then it wasn't sacred, it was strategic. And if belief followed incentives like any other system, then perhaps it could be improved. Perhaps fear-based obedience was not inevitable. Perhaps religion didn't need to be dismantled, only audited. As Elias closed his laptop that night, he understood something dangerous about himself. He wasn't trying to destroy religion, he was tempted to optimize it. And for a man who trusted numbers more than God, that temptation felt less like heresy and more like responsibility. This was the moment the banker stopped observing belief from the outside and began questioning whether the rules of religion had ever been divine at all. Elias Roth had spent his life uncovering hidden structures, but nothing prepared him for what lay behind Account 771B, an inactive vault line buried beneath layers of obsolete code and ceremonial labels. It appeared harmless at first, a legacy fund closed to modern oversight and categorized simply as perpetual donations. Yet the dates stretched back hundreds of years, long before modern banking existed. That alone should have been impossible. Curiosity, Elias knew, was the most dangerous currency of all, but he authorized a deep audit anyway. The deeper he went, the stranger the ledger became. The earliest entries weren't digital at all, but scanned reproductions of handwritten records, translated and standardized over time. Each page bore different symbols, crosses, crescents, stars, unfamiliar markings, yet all followed the same financial logic. Contributions were recorded alongside annotations referencing moral adjustments, behavioral shifts, and necessary reinterpretations. It wasn't a holy text, it was a manual for survival. As Elias studied the data, a chilling pattern emerged. Periods of famine, war, or economic collapse were always followed by revisions in doctrine. Restrictions loosened when resources thinned. Obligations intensified when institutions needed funding. Acts once condemned became tolerated, then later rebranded as virtuous when they aligned with stability. The ledger documented these changes with ruthless clarity, as if belief itself were being recalibrated like interest rates. What disturbed Elias most was the precision. The adjustments weren't reactive, they were predictive. Leaders had anticipated loss of followers, migration or rebellion, and altered teachings before collapse occurred. Faith, he realized, had been quietly engineered. What millions believed to be divine revelation was often strategic foresight guided by economics. God did not always speak first. The balance sheet did. Elias began running simulations using modern behavioral models. He fed the historical data into his systems, mapping belief shifts against financial flows. The results were undeniable. Fear-based doctrines spiked during instability. Promises of reward flourished during surplus. Even concepts like forgiveness and punishment followed measurable patterns of economic stress. Religion behaved exactly like a market under pressure. Yet Elias felt no triumph. Instead, he felt an unsettling respect for the architects of belief. They had not been frauds or villains, but survivors. In a chaotic world, they used the tools they had, myth, morality, and money, to hold societies together. The tragedy was not that religion had been shaped by economics, but that no one had ever admitted it. That silence troubled Elias more than deception. If people understood how belief had evolved, would they abandon it, or would they demand something better? The ledger suggested a frightening possibility that belief itself was elastic, capable of transformation without collapse. The rules people thought were sacred might only be temporary solutions that overstayed their purpose. For the first time in Elias's life, considered belief not as a lie, but an outdated system in need of redesign. What if religion could be freed from financial survival? What if morality didn't need to depend on fear of punishment or promise of reward? His simulations hinted at something revolutionary. When belief systems removed economic pressure, cooperation increased and conflict decreased. Elias closed the ledger long after midnight, his hands trembling slightly. He had crossed a line from observer to participant. The knowledge he now possessed could destabilize institutions that had stood for millennia, or reshape them into something honest. As Elias shut down his systems that night, one thought refused to leave him. If faith had always followed money, then whoever controlled the money controlled belief. And for the first time in history, that person might not be a priest, but a banker. Elias Roth did not announce his intentions. He understood too well that belief systems collapsed fastest when confronted directly. Instead, he moved with the quiet precision that had defined his banking career. Through a web of anonymous foundations, educational grants, and humanitarian trusts, Elias began redirecting capital away from traditional religious hierarchies and toward communities willing to try something radically different. There were no temples built, no grand leaders appointed, no sacred symbols to rally behind, only a framework, simple, transparent, and deliberately incomplete. The new doctrine was not presented as a religion. Elias insisted on that. It had no God, no prophet, and no promise of punishment or paradise. Its core principles fit on a single page: shared responsibility, open records, mutual care, and ethical action measured by outcome, not obedience. Contributions were voluntary, publicly tracked, and used solely for tangible needs: education, healthcare, conflict mediation, and local infrastructure. Nothing mystical, nothing hidden. At first, participation was small. A few disillusioned communities, former believers tired of guilt and fear, agreed to experiment. What surprised Elias was not their skepticism, but their relief. Without rigid rituals to perform or authority figures to appease, people began to engage with belief as a practice rather than a command. Meetings resembled town councils more than sermons. Moral discussions were grounded in real consequences instead of ancient threats. For the first time, faith felt practical. Elias monitored everything: donation patterns, social cohesion, conflict rates, productivity, psychological well-being. The numbers spoke clearly. Where fear had once